I wanted to sort of draw our attention to something which hasn't come up yet, and I think it would be remiss if we're talking about community and infrastructure, inclusivity and prosperity in the city, that we should really also be noting gentrification as an aspect that is possibly inevitable if we're thinking of improvements to education infrastructure, transport infrastructure, healthcare, housing, digital technological infrastructure, and of course public space. And it does require an innovative approach, really. The solutions to that are not at all obvious, and I don't think any one sector or discipline can really solve it by themselves. But if we're looking at a situation in Manchester where increasingly there's more investment, there's more attraction from people moving in, there's more perhaps professional level employment, increased property values, then how do we extend or improve infrastructure without displacing existing communities, doing all the worthy work of engaging them, improving their life, their environment, but then inevitably in the long term displacing them? And I would like to suggest that's something we probably need to think about at a structural level at the same time as what do we want to do and how do we do it, not something that we add on later, because then it really is definitely too late to try and address it.
There's a lot of private developments that have become city centers or key areas of cities like Springfield or go to Birmingham or the side by the canal, and it's owned by the developer with signs that they can throw anyone out of that.
Yeah, it's not actually public realm anymore.
It's not public realm, and suddenly that community sense and starts disappearing. So yeah, I think gentrification, this sort of ground control is a huge challenge for participation.
I mean, you want success. I think that the problem really, I mean, you're talking about displacement of communities, of course, it's all about affordability. Look at what's happening in London. I mean, there are big lessons. I mean, at the moment, actually, as I discovered recently, some of the rents in the Northern Quarter are on the same level as they are in London. I mean, it's happening at a very considerable rate. And the issue actually isn't just displacing communities, it's also maintaining renewal and openness to new, young craft and art and all the rest of it actually being able to operate. I mean, now we are, of course, talking about Greater Manchester, and we should think about Greater Manchester, not just only about the city centre. But I think it's a real challenge, and I think that one is a real challenge for planning. And I think there's a real role for planning. And so, so often we're saying planning should get out of the way, and Northern Quarter would never have happened otherwise, and that's true, but there is also a real role for planning in terms of trying to keep a sort of balanced community happening. So I think your point is really important. I think though then if we're talking about having these networks that we can engage with, what I'm also really interested in is that if we're talking about engagement with the community, we consult people about specific projects. Right? So there isn't a way in which we can just go to somewhere and consult. You know, the needs, one project is not like another, and therefore everything is effectively ad hoc. So we design the consultation process for every project kind of ad hoc. And I'm wondering whether there is something in what you're talking about with your network, and being able to use that and to engage with that, and to connect it up with something else, whereby, say, using technology or using a physical environment, we can actually consult with people on any project. You know, whether it's, the Pilcrow pub, or it's, one of your fabulous towers, or, or whatever it might be, the stations in Greater Manchester, which is a big public realm issue at the moment. Now, I know that you can't have one solution for all, but I wonder whether we could have something that people know that process exists and they can engage with it more. From the community end as well. I wonder whether there is something.
There is potential for that. In consultation for the Manchester Residential Design Guide, it was one of the suggestions we put forward, which because a really positive document, it pushes engagement. It talks about working with users in the area. It has post occupancy requirements in it, so that developers can't get let off the hook. So it's got lots of really positives in it, but earlier drafts of it had a much stronger community engagement kind of feel. One of the potentials was that if you do have a network of community groups across the city, if the whole city is moving all of its infrastructure around place, then that shouldn't be too hard to organise. And then the residential design guide could have included a strong suggestion that you engage with that group or groups in that area. I mean, it doesn't need to be the same shape. All the areas are different, and it's like we went to Hume and Moss Side and we said to people there, do we need to set up a Hume partnership and a Moss Side partnership? And they went, no, it's fine. It's, we'll all go to the same stuff. So it's Hume and Moss Side. But in Mars Platting, for example, the partnership that we made there is exactly follows the PFI boundary, because it's kind of like it is a private fiefdom and it needs to be dealt with separately. So there are different territories like you were pointing out earlier on.
I'm wondering whether we could start thinking about the strands that we've been talking about, and I've been going through my notes as you've been talking. Being as I'm an architect, I've got a diagram. Sorry.
That's design.
That's design. But I'm just looking at infrastructure projects, which I think we've all defined as being with the community in the centre. That everything else is going around the periphery, and we've definitely said that we need to define what the infrastructure is. We definitely need to evidence and record whatever we need to for that piece of infrastructure. Then something that seems to be missing is how do we then communicate that back, because the communications that don't necessarily work as also connections. So we're communicating not just with those people, but on a bigger platform. And how do we? I don't like using the word platforms and all those sort of things, but everybody uses it. So there we go. And then change, because that's the other thing. I sort of think we have this sort of lovely virtual circle of definition, evidence, communication, connect, change, and off we go again. Which is just to define how we do the process, but actually coming up with project ideas for the future. I've got a number that I've picked up from around the table. I'll read them out to you. I wonder whether we could have some discussion on it, and others, if you've got others. I've got collecting our evidence in one location, so actually everybody in Manchester putting into something. Of course, we've got to have somebody, or somebody, I should say, rather than somebody, prepared to collect that evidence, and then we've got to know what we want to get out of it. So that's a really important piece of discussion. I think understanding the mapping of fine grains of networks and how you do that, how we communicate that, it's a question mark for me. I liked Lucy's idea of maybe we should be talking about gentrification, and when we're talking about connections, well, obviously planning must come into that, but I don't think we have to talk about to our own navels. I think it needs to be who would we connect with to make that happen. I'm holding a meeting with commissioning clients, and there were two issues there. One is using stage 0 and stage 7 properly so that everybody benefits long term, and then also how do we use those sort of meetings to properly influence policy based on evidence. Evidence seems to be the thing that is being collected in little pots, and that's extremely frightening to me, because I think it would be really good if we had all this stuff. There's always a question mark about, well, this is my piece of research, and is putting it into a big pot and sharing it the right thing to be doing? Does it take somebody's business away? I don't know. I mean, I'm going to throw that in for discussion. And then the actual process, the design process, and the way that it needs to be bespoke. How do we cope with that? But the most important thing I wrote down, I think, was what is good infrastructure design, and it seems to be, whatever it is it's for the convenience of citizens. So that's our goal. How do we get there? I don't think we should actually aim from this discussion to solve all the problems of the world, but maybe there are a few things here that we could latch on to.
So I think the idea of evidence in one location that isn't just something that's being done within a research institution, but that is actually done, involves the design community. I think that sounds really interesting. The understanding the fine-grained networks. I think, Stefan, you've started there a couple of really great things that we can potentially build on, which is I think is great.
Innovation community and using hackathons.
Yes.
There's so much creative thinking there, and they can come with brilliant solutions as well to problems like this.
Yes, there's youth transport hackathons that we did earlier in the year, absolutely fantastic. And of course, it is again, I mean, you can engage with different sections, different generations in different ways, and some of those existing procedures are really good. It's how we have this overview of how we in Manchester can engage with the community on these bigger questions or smaller questions as they come along, and having a way of doing it.
I think it's important that what worries me about evidentiary design is you end up doing nothing because the evidence tells you to do nothing. And the critical thing, I think, is about seeing evidence as a mechanism to actually move things forwards. You know, to meet ambition. I mean, I'd question whether design is a problem-based activity, but that's probably a conversation outside this
That's another symposium.
I mean, I think it's about what is the ambition of this city and this region in terms of where collectively things could go, and that's citizens will inevitably form part of that conversation. You know, it's undoubtedly true. You know, how can we actually maximise the capacity of the region? You know, the part of the conversation Stefan and I have been having around connecting with communities in new ways is to actually release the potential there, and then you can connect that potential to people who have the ability to sort of visualise and frame it in a way that produces something you'd never have expected. And that for me is what's exciting about this kind of forum, is actually trying to start to pull things together.
We only want to find out more evidence so we know better what to do.
Yeah. So the whole purpose is to deliberately mess up the natural experiment to make it better.
Yes.
Now, I agree that you don't want evidence to constrain the possibilities,
Yeah.
but you know, you still want to know the problems that you're going to come up against. Can I ask about the other one, that's this meeting with commissioning clients? How can we do that in a way that is other than ad hoc, other than let's all go and have lunch together, or whatever it might be? How can you make something of it?
It's a culture shift, isn't it? You know, I brought in from companies that remain nameless who are engaged in that early stage stuff, and I've had students say to them, "Blimey, how much are you charging fees compared to what we're getting? And what are you offering? And you don't have any risk." And the answer is usually, well, the client's willing to pay us and not engage you for the same amount of money at the early stage on the project. So it's a cultural shift. The culture shift is based on value, I think, and it's how you, and it's starting to happen. Some practices are getting into the clients in a much deeper level and building up long-term relationships.
As an example, we were involved in quite a large site in Newcastle, going back 10, 12 years, and we ended up at sort of loggerheads with the planners because our client had quite an ambitious plan for this site, and the planners had no kind of policy framework within the city to kind of cover the kind of scale and density that was being proposed. And we ended up in this kind of quite strange consultation event that we all agreed collectively would be a way of kind of trying to unlock some of the issues. And it was facilitated by this kind of external group that the client brought on board. And the first thing that they did was they sat everybody down in small groups, about 4 or 5 people per group, and we all had to talk about how we felt about the process. I happened to be in a group with the head of planning at Newcastle at the time and a representative from our client, and I was expecting it to be quite an awkward discussion. And actually everybody around the table was quite honest, and the guy, the head of planning, ended up saying, look, we're quite closed-minded here, because that's the culture of us as a city has been, and this is why I came back to trying to understand what Manchester's like as a place. Really, it's interesting, you know, how a city can have externally at least a personality, and their view of themselves was that they were quite closed-minded, and through that discussion eventually we started to unlock some possibilities within the site. It took ages, took years, but I just think that there is that kind of, you know, it's not as though clients who buy these big pieces of cities aren't interested in making them successful and making them, you know, fantastic places to be and to live. That offers them great value. Maybe there is some sort of commercial issue and some commercial risk around sort of engaging too early with people. It does bring benefits, and I think, you know, trying to educate clients on that is tricky. And you know, as a group around the table, we'll have different interactions with different types of groups and bodies, and public and private. But there could be a kind of forum, and it could be quite open and honest. And maybe it's, you know, maybe it's not filmed. It's something that's kind of just
Chatham House rules.
Yeah, exactly. You know, just to get your cards on the table. What's your experience of working in Manchester? What's it like? Because I think dialogue is important, both, you know, in terms of the sort of grassroots dialogue, and also the people who are effectively holding the purse strings for all of this stuff.
Some kind of forum, but I mean, a forum of whom? Who's around the table?
Well, I think it would have to involve the City Council and a group of stakeholders, and perhaps the people that they have maybe employed. Maybe it's based on kind of case studies of particular projects or examples,